Now, you're probably wondering why I'm wearing all of these things. Well, these are the things that you need if you'd like to have a medicated birth. Now, here's what I want you to keep in mind. I call it a medicated birth because that's what it is. I think it's so important that we start to use the language that actually describes the contents of our experience, as opposed to using the term natural birth. I think that natural birth is not a useful term. It doesn't actually tell us what's happening. It is natural to get pregnant. It is natural to move through a pregnancy, and it is natural to bring a baby into the world and to birth your baby, however you plan to do it. But you have options around how you go about doing it. You could have a medicated birth, which we're going to go into more detail about right now, or you could have a unmedicated birth or a cesarean birth, which we will also talk about a little later in this class. So, when you're talking about how you are thinking about navigating your birth experience, use the terms that actually describe what's happening. I also think that the term natural birth is competitive, it's divisive, and it actually makes it unclear as to what took place at the birth experience. A birth isn't any less natural should you choose to use interventions to support your birth process. Because as I expressed when we talked about your birth preferences, it's really up to you to decide how you want to feel in labor. In fact, I think it is the most subjective and feminist decision to decide whether or not you want to experience pain, and if you do, to what level. So let's explore what options are available to you if you're exploring the idea of having a medicated birth. The first thing is something called nitrous oxide, which is more and more available throughout the United States, but very much available widely throughout Europe and Canada. Nitrous oxide is administered using an oxygen mask, and nitrous oxide is what I like to call a distraction tool, in the sense that it's not actually going to reduce pain, but it's a medication that helps to distract your mind when a contraction is happening. And the way that you would use nitrous is a mask like this would be hooked up to a nitrous oxide tank. And that tank would be administering nitrous to you as you need it, but only when you inhale. So you would take your mask as you start to feel a contraction build, place the mask over your face and breathe in as the contraction intensifies. And when you get to your full dose of nitrous, the mask will naturally just drop out of your hand and you can move through the contraction, hopefully feeling more comfortable. The nitrous oxide that you will receive either in the hospital or in a birth center or administered by your midwife wherever she has the ability to do that will be made up of 50% pure nitrous oxide and 50% oxygen. What's great about nitrous is it doesn't actually impact you or the baby in any negative way. The next set of medication options available to you are IV medications. Those medications might be fentanyl or Demerol. Here's the thing about those medications. They have a very short half-life. And by that, I mean that they don't last very long in the body. So if you're offered fentanyl or Demerol, which you could be offered during active labor when the contractions get really intense, keep in mind that you can only have 3 doses of fentanyl or Demerol. They only last for about 45 minutes, and because they're administered through an IV, they're going into your venous system, so into your bloodstream, which means that both you and the baby get it. And then we have epidurals, which I'm sure you've heard lots about. Now, before I go into the deeper details about epidurals, what I do want to talk to you about first is the timing of them. Timing when you want to get your epidural is really important to keep you in a place of coping and in a place of containment, as opposed to a place of deep suffering and pain during your labor experience. So the best time to get an epidural is really going to be up to you. You're going to know your pain threshold and where you are going to feel like you need the support and when. However, ideally, having some dilation and some effacement take place in your cervix is going to be a better starting block to build in something like an epidural, because when we have good dilation and some effacement, your labor is really starting to move, and an epidural will just help support that process. Now, in terms of pain and being able to manage that and timing your epidural, I would suggest that you look into getting an epidural prepared for you when you feel like you can't do maybe more than 5 to 10 contractions. The reason for that is because an epidural is a team effort. You'll have to have an anesthesiologist come in order to put in the epidural catheter, and your nurse will have to be there, and potentially even your doula or your support person or your partner. So it's a global effort to get you there, and so it can take anywhere up to sometimes 30 minutes, maybe even an hour if you're in a very busy hospital in order to get your epidural. And then post getting the epidural, it usually takes about 25 minutes for the medication to move through your body. And the medication works by gravity, meaning that it's going to have to move from one side of your body to the other. So you'll need to be turned to your left and rest for a while on that side, and then to your right and rest for a while on that side in order for the medication to have its full effect. So keeping that in mind, that you won't go from, I'm in so much pain, I need something right now, to, ooh, I feel a lot better in 5 minutes, that should help you build out how you want to plan to engage around an epidural when you need one. It's really about that forward planning as opposed to needing something instantly in the moment. Now, to get an epidural, a couple other things have to happen. Going back to this mask, there's a possibility that while having an epidural, your blood pressure might drop and you might need to have oxygen in order to help support your blood pressure. Another thing that's going to support your blood pressure will be the IV that will have electrolytes that will be given to you before you actually even have your epidural placed. So that's another factor to keep in mind when wanting an epidural, is that that whole entire bag of fluids needs to go into your body in order for you to get an epidural first. And it takes at least 20 to 30 minutes to run a full bag of fluids into your body. So keep that in mind as you're factoring when is the right time to ask your doctor or ask a nurse to help get your epidural set up and going. You'll also need continuous blood pressure monitoring, so this blood pressure cuff will be on your body throughout the rest of your labor. And in order to get the fluids, you'll have to have a HEP lock or a saline lock hooked up to an IV bag, which will continue to give you fluids throughout the rest of your labor. Now, during the actual placement of the epidural, a couple of things have to happen. You have to remain completely still, and then the anesthesiologist is going to ask you to curve your back like a cat, so curving out like this, so that they can see your spine easily and find where they're actually going to insert the needle and then place the epidural catheter. This is an epidural catheter. This is actually what's going to stay in your body, continuing to give you medication throughout the rest of your labor until you birth your baby. This catheter will be connected to a remote where you can continue to give yourself what they call boluses of medication every 10 minutes. What I have here is a little bit of bioskin just to illustrate what's happening when the anesthesiologist is placing the epidural catheter into your back. The first step is going to be to use a needle to get into the epidural space, like so. And once the needle is in that space, the catheter here is threaded through the needle into the epidural space. And then once the needle is in the epidural space, the epidural catheter is threaded through that into the epidural space in your spine. The needle is then removed and the catheter remains and is taped down your back in order for the medication to continue running through your body until you have your baby. The last intervention that you'll need when you're having an epidural is a bladder catheter. This will be placed after your epidural has been placed in order to help relieve your bladder throughout the rest of your labor. So this bladder catheter, once again, is inserted into your urethra, which is where your urine is released from. Having a medicated birth and using an epidural means that there will be limitations on your food and drink. You won't be able to have anything other than clear fluids from the moment you get your epidural until your baby is born.